Hi, I'm Michelle White, sitting in for Sarah Cowgill. Joining me today are Graham Noble, Andrew Moran, Dave Patterson, and Tim Donner. This is The Conservative Five, Liberty Nation's online TV news program. The noose is getting ever so tight around the neck of Venezuelan President Nicolas Maduro. With the aircraft carrier USS Gerald Ford off the coast and President Trump closing the airspace, Maduro's options for getting out of Dodge are severely limited. Okay, panel, last week, Cuba warned the United States not to intervene in Venezuela, and Iran on Saturday condemned Trump closing the airspace over Venezuela. Their warnings did not appear to faze President Trump. In fact, it was a bit audacious of them to issue such a cautionary note. Dave, what do you say about the rapidly moving series of events?
Well, I'd say that Maduro's circumstances are growing more dire by the moment. You know, his days are numbered. The Trump administration is applying diplomatic ultimatums, economic sanctions, and military operational posturing, and combined, they're a formidable force. On November 21st, President Trump had a phone call with Maduro, and it lasted about 15 minutes. Reports are that he told Maduro, "You can save yourself and those closest to you, but you have to leave the country." And Trump offered him a timeline. Maduro needed to be gone by November 28th. Well, that line in the sand has come and gone. But if Maduro is trying to test President Trump, that tactic has proven to be a bad idea in the past for others. On the military front, the U.S. has conducted 3 months of strikes, as you mentioned. They've killed 83 narco-terrorists and destroyed 20 drug boats. I think it pretty much tells the world Trump means business. You know, I don't see a ground assault, however, on Venezuela happening anytime soon, and it possibly a limited operations, special operations assault on fentanyl or other drug factories. But remember, there is a complicating factor, and that is that there are approximately 25,000 Cuban military advisors in Venezuela, and that makes the wicket a little stickier. Maduro's staff, however, has requested a second phone call. But if there's nothing offered that looks like Maduro stepping down, then I don't think it's going to be any more effective than the first one.
Tim, from a political perspective, doesn't this seem a little like deja vu with a strong American president trying to remove communist regimes in Latin America? And is this the Trump doctrine?
Well, some might say it's pretty similar to the Reagan doctrine. But when you look at Trump, he doesn't fit any of the ordinary descriptions of a president in terms of foreign policy. He's not a hawk. He's not a dove. He's not an isolationist. He is what I would call a foreign policy realist. And he's having some problems with the MAGA base, supposedly, although I think the left is playing this up, with the sense that, wait, you said make America great again, America first. What is he doing with these foreign adventures? Well, I think that it's pretty clear that Venezuela, as a safe haven for murderous drug cartels, is a clear and present danger to the United States and has been for some time. So I think that really Venezuela effectively declared war on the United States, not a war on drugs, but a war with drugs, essentially with impunity, sending untold amounts of fentanyl, which has, we need to remind people, has killed tens of thousands of Americans. Back in 1989, I believe it was, we had a similar situation with Manuel Noriega in Panama, and President George H.W. Bush went right in and took the guy out. Like Dave said, I don't see a land operation anytime soon, but Trump is going to use every other form of pressure he possibly can. I think the way to look at this president's foreign policy is to really compare it to Andrew Jackson. Now, that was 200 years ago, but Jackson believed exactly the same things. He was intent on expanding trade across the world. And he also, when necessary, took military action in retaliation against pirates on the open seas, for example, which we don't have as much anymore, but it was a serious threat to American national interest then. So I think that, Trump, the left is trying to play up that he's going to divide the base by doing a foreign invasion, quote unquote. But like Dave said, I don't think he's going to do that. But he is going to put every form of pressure on Nicolas Maduro, the same way many people think that he should, and probably will soon on Vladimir Putin.
Graham, do you think we are suffering the consequences of President George H.W. Bush not finishing the job of ousting the Sandinistas in Nicaragua? And will Trump's actions in Venezuela dampen or quash the Bush family from trying to reboot their dynasty and control the Republican Party?
Well, I'd start by saying that I do not see any scenario in which the Bush family comes back and becomes the controlling force of the Republican Party. I think their days are well and truly over. I don't know who they'd put up for the job, quite frankly. I mean, Jeb Bush has always,
there's a big difference between Donald Trump and me.
at least in terms of presidential politics, he's always come over as something of a, what was it Trump used to call him, low energy. And, he comes over as very much that. And I don't think the MAGA movement, as it's come to be known, would ever put up with a return of the Bushes. Because I don't think, I think, Trump supporters are a different breed altogether than the people who supported the Bush family. And I think those days of the neocons in generally are kind of over and done with. I think there's more neocons in the Democratic Party these days, actually, than there are in the Republican Party.
But if that's the case, then why does Trump always cozy up to Lindsey Graham? And he's always slamming a guy like Rand Paul. Why is that the case? Neocons don't have any influence. Why is that the case then? Please explain it to me, Graham, or Dave, for that matter. Mr. Regime.
I'm not sure that's necessarily a kind of a neocon thing. I think that's more me. And don't get me wrong, Andrew. I'm with you on that. My view is, what is the deal? What is his love affair with Lindsey Graham, who's barely trustworthy, at the best of times. I don't know. I think he just. I think it's kind of a political tactic that he keeps Lindsey Graham close, because I believe that he thinks Lindsey Graham has the power to do some moving and shaking in the background on his behalf. I guess that's why it is.
Yes, so I think
he almost uses Lindsey Graham as a useful tool.
He understands that Lindsey Graham has tremendous influence in the Republican caucus in the United States Senate. And he feels like, I think that Lindsey Graham has the pulse of congressional Republicans or Senate Republicans. And he's a deal maker, and he's a guy who's effective at that. So I think it's really more a tactical thing than an ideological thing.
Yep.
And Tim, I've never actually seen Lindsey Graham as a neocon. I mean, he goes with the flow when it's necessary, and kind of is an obstructionist when he thinks it is useful to him. But I see him as a Trump supporter, and he's going to back Trump in most cases.
Graham, let's get back to that first question, because I want you to have the final word on that. Are we suffering the consequences of George H.W. Bush not finishing the job? Is that what we're seeing now?
Well, I think it all comes down to, I'm not sure if I would say that entirely, but of course, we've always had this problem, or the United States has always had this problem with certain South and Central American countries flirting with Marxism, socialism, whatever you want to call it, and having these little people's revolutionary moments. And of course, the danger for that beyond those groups, because none of those countries are ever posing a serious threat to the United States. But then if they're flirting with these kind of left-wing extremist policies, then they're opening the door to adversaries such as Russia and China to kind of jump in there and cozy up to them. And that presents a threat to us. I mean, the country of El Salvador or Nicaragua or Honduras, any of these countries, and Venezuela as well, do not present any threat to America, except
for the drugs,
as conduits for more powerful adversaries overseas to use them to get to us. Yeah, there's certainly a kind of a continuing theme that's been running for decades through Central America and South America.
I would add one more thing, Michelle, which is I think what Trump is doing here. We talked about Andrew Jackson and the similarities to the Jackson foreign policy, but what he's doing is he's reapplying the old Monroe doctrine set forth by James Monroe, early president, which said that the United States should essentially control things in its hemisphere and keep people from the other hemisphere from having substantial influence. And we know that China is increasingly involved in Latin America and South America, and Trump is, in the long run, out to diminish Chinese influence in the region.
Right. And while you're talking about Jackson was fighting the Barbary pirates. So all of this hoopla over Trump's attacking drug boats in the Caribbean, there was precedent for that as well.
They weren't pirates. They were just innocent fishermen.
Andrew, I want to get to you from an economic perspective. If the socialist regime is replaced with a more open society, an open economy, how long do you think before we can right the Venezuelan ship, and particularly for the oil industry?
Well, years ago, I interviewed an economist named Robert Wenzel. He's dead, but I interviewed him for Swaponomics TV during the pandemic. And actually, I posed that question to him, or I'm not sure I posed on his blog. But anyway, he said that if you remove socialist price controls in Venezuela, you would essentially alleviate many of the problems almost immediately in Venezuela. You know, I've reported on the trials and tribulations of Venezuela for so many years, and it's the same socialist dogma that has plagued other countries that have flirted with socialism. Now, on the issue of oil, you have to look back to the pre-Chavez years. You know, Venezuela is sitting on the world's largest oil reserves. It was one of the wealthiest countries in Latin America up until the 1980s, maybe 1990s. And, you know, when oil collapsed, the rest of Venezuela collapsed too. But that wasn't because of you needed socialism. It was because of government mismanagement. Because when the country relied about 90% of oil exports at the time, then when oil prices collapsed, then it didn't generate enough revenue. So what the Venezuelan government did is that it started borrowing more money because the economic growth was declining. And because of that, that was the start of the rise of people like Hugo Chavez and other socialist leaders. Now, I would say one last thing when it comes to, free market economics in places like Venezuela. I always refer to Milton Friedman here, and he said that capitalism doesn't create a free country, but rather free countries have capitalism. And since we mentioned Jeb Bush earlier, I would say, please clap.
Like golf clap.
Well, one thing is for sure, Americans are not in favor of boots on the ground in Venezuela, but they are tired of the fentanyl crisis, and that's the bottom line. Maduro appears to be cornered, and we might rightly wonder whether he'll be taking up space in prison sometime soon. That's it for our Conservative 5 panel today. Check out our other C5 shows and segments on your favorite video platform. YouTube, Vimeo, Rumble, we're on all of them. As well as Liberty Nation News has its own Roku channel, where you can see all of our TV productions. Stop by and see our new aggregate polling operation, The Public Square. I'm your host, Michelle White, sitting in for Sarah Cowgill. Thank you for joining us today. Get your fix of free thinking and free speech at libertynation.com.